And with that, 2024 has come to an end, and it's been one hell of a ride. But without getting into the dire state of the world at this moment, this year has been so good for rock and metal. So good, in fact, that albums that would have made my top 20 of last year didn't even make my top 31 of this year. If you want to follow that list, I post them every day of December, and there's a thread on both my Twitter and Blue Sky if you want to check them out. But, as always with things, there has to be some that are better than others. And so, to end off 2024, I'm going to count down my top 15 albums of the year. For clarification, unlike my video from halfway through the year, I am not counting EPs in this list. If you want those, I have a separate video on them. And no compilations or live albums, just brand new studio albums of new material. This list has been a pain to make, because there are so many good albums that I wish I could talk about. So, before we get into the list, let's take a look at some albums that just missed out on the cut. And now, onto the list. First up, we have an album that didn't make it to my halfway through the year list, because I hadn't listened to it, and boy was I missing out. While it was close between me including this and the Seagal album, as both are amazing, this one just edged it out for me. This London band have a way with their riffs that just make them so enjoyable to listen to for me. They play around with each other so well, which just makes the music so infectious. It really fits with the bass and drums to make for a really tight band. The songwriting is also amazing. This band are able to make long songs that don't often feel their lengths, which for a debut album is absolutely incredible. This band share a lot in common with new wave of British heavy metal bands, but not in the way most throwback bands do. While a lot just try to rip off the heights of Iron Maiden and Saxon, these guys try to go for a proper feel of the movement, and the smaller bands within it, which is awesome to hear. My only complaint is that at 51 minutes, it drags a little bit towards the end, considering some of the songs are pretty long, and I would have liked to have heard them done a couple shorter songs or shortening the long songs, because they can get pretty long and samey. But songs like Temptress towards the end do help break it up a bit with it being a fast one. This is an awesome album and band that have a lot of potential with them, and considering they're from London, I really hope I get a chance to see them soon, as the last time they played a couple months ago, I was busy seeing Creator Testament and Anthrax. Add this album to your list if you haven't already. It's an awesome album that is well worth a listen. After over 50 years, Judas Priest show they are not going to let the young'uns take full control of modern metal. While I do have issues with this album that I will get into, the first listen to this album was honestly one of the best experiences I've had all year. Panic Attack really shows how this band is not slowing down with their music anytime soon. Songs like Serpent and the King, the title track, and especially As God Is My Witness are all shredding and heavy Priest songs that the band do best. I love the slower songs on here too, as I love it when Priest have a good amount of variety on their albums. Rob Halford in his 70s sounds energized and as good as ever, and does not sound like he's going to be giving in anytime soon, which is great to hear. But for me, Richie Faulkner has been the MVP of modern Priest as a whole, not only in his great guitar playing, but it feels like he's been able to push the band to have some of the most interesting music of their career. It's not perfect, and it could be shortened down a bit, as the back half leads on to be a bit forgettable and filled with what I'd call filler, but that's not to say they're awful, just kind of below average pre-songs. Also, it's not an album I actually found myself coming back to as much as I thought I would, but that may be because I burnt myself out with it by listening to it a ton on the week of release. This album went above my expectations, which is saying something as Priest are one of my favourite bands of all time, and the release of this album did nothing but strengthen that opinion. If I'm being honest, death metal this year hasn't hit as much for me as it did last year, but the ones that hit, really hit. A tech death band with heavy influence from my favourite thrash band of all time, Voivod? Yes please. This was an album I listened to a ton at the start of the year. It sounds nothing like anything that's going on around today, with a really cool aesthetic that sounds like a computer going into overload. It's a good controlled chaos however, and not just mindless guitar and bass wankery, which has been my issue with a lot of tech death. They come up with a load of great melodies and riffs, interesting parts that lead to all the songs to be memorable and have their own identity. The vocals are great and guttural without being hard to understand, and the rhythm section do a great job at keeping the chaos supported and under control, with the drums especially doing some really cool fills throughout the songs. The aesthetic also really helps them separate themselves from other tech death bands, and the riffs they show as early on as their debut album show they have a great career ahead of them. I'm glad this album got them noticed in the metal underground, as it's an amazing debut and I can't wait to see what happens next, as they could go on to be one of the most interesting and enjoyable death metal bands in recent times. Next up is my favourite black metal album of the year, and it should come as no surprise to people that know me that the black metal I enjoy is when it has a lot of melody in it. Vorka were not a band I'd heard of before this year, but when I got this recommended to me by a friend, I could tell what the hype was about right from the first song. This is filled with so much good melody in the guitars and vocals that it doesn't get too samey for me, with the vocals especially being exactly what I want to hear from this type of music. What also helps this is with how much variety there is on this album, not just in the songwriting but things as basic as the tempo. They aren't afraid to change it, which helps keep the album fresh throughout the runtime. The songs are long but never overstay their welcome. This is once again an album that offers multiple listens due to the amount of things going on in each song. The production overall, however, is amazing, and this really sounds like you're in space, which I think is the atmosphere the band were trying to pull off, and they do a great job at it. It's very lush in a way that a lot of black metal isn't, and while I know there are a lot of people who prefer their black metal productions when they are completely raw, and I don't mind that for certain genres like war metal, I really like it when they sound like this. If there's one thing I would critique about the album, I wish that a couple of the songs were cut down a little bit, and I didn't go back to the album as much throughout the year as I really thought I would, but if you like melodic black metal, this is a must-listen album. Probably one of the most hyped albums for metal fans this year, The Last Will and Testament marked one of the biggest eras of hype I've seen in a long while, and it made sense when you heard the album. After over a decade, Opeth were back with the Growls to make their best album in years, at least for me. My issue with the last couple albums wasn't the clean vocals like some other fans, but that I was not a fan of the songwriting, and that has all been fixed on their most recent album. This is a very exciting and intricate album, but it's still as emotional and fun to listen to as any of the albums from their classic run, like Still Life and Blackwater Park. The songwriting on this album is absolutely amazing, and while I think it's going to take a bit until it really clicks with me as much as the classic era does, it's already lending itself really well to re-listens. And, of course, the Growls being back does add a lot to the classic Opeth sound back to the album, with them mixing the clean vocals just as well as they did on some of the band's classic era albums. That, plus some great guest appearances from Joey Tempest from Europe and Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull, make this easily one of the best albums of the year. And while it's not placing as high for me as it did for many others, don't take that as a knock against this album. This really proved to me that Opeth were back after a couple albums I was not a massive fan of, but without just pandering to the classic sound, with this almost feeling like a culmination of all of their eras combined, and makes me very excited for what they are going to do in the near future. Do Not Go to War with the Demon of Mazadran is not only the longest title of this video, but is also an album that got better for me with every listen I gave it. My favourite progressive metal album of the entire year. Lowen are a band I got recommended to by a friend on Twitter, and I'm so happy I did, cause wow, this was better than I could have ever thought it would be. I always like albums that show me something I haven't heard before, and this album really felt like that the first time I heard it. A clear inspiration from Middle Eastern music and likely bands such as Orphan Land, this manages to have its own spin on the style. The instrumentals are intense and clash very well with the beautiful vocals, giving it a great contrast that can sometimes be missing from progressive metal for me, where it can sometimes come off a bit samey. There is such a grand and epic feel to this album that only some bands are able to do as well as this, and it makes it an album I came back to quite a lot. I'm really bummed I forgot to go see them. I only found out about the show after it happened, and one of my biggest regrets of the year. I really hope I'll be able to catch these guys soon. The singing from Nina Saidi, sorry for the bad pronunciation, is absolutely beautiful. One of my favourite vocal performances of the year, and once again marking 2024 as a year that showed me how good female vocalists are, and how they should be much more recognised and in as many things as male vocalists. Overall, Lowen is easily my favourite progressive metal album of the year, and a band that I can see going places from this album that has just given them quite a big push, and I look forward to hearing whatever they have coming out in the future. Before we start this segment, it would be remiss not to mention the tragic death of Lucifer's Hammer singer, Andreas Hades Adesime, as he was taken from us way too soon and when his band were taking great strides in their career. My deepest condolences and thoughts with his family and friends. I really hope this band can move on from this. Being Exist by Lucifer's Hammer was one of the albums from this year that I listened to the most. I was a fan of their previous album, and with a cover as cool as this one, I couldn't help getting hyped for the release of this, and boy did it not let me down. While they wear the influences of bands like Rainbow and Thin Lizzy right on their sleeve, they don't steal from old bands and have plenty of their own things going on that they are bringing to the table. The guitar work is easily the best thing about this album, sounding right out of the 70s. It's some of the best guitar work of the year, being so captivating and making everything so memorable. Easily the thing that draws me and so many others to this band the most. So many harmonising solos that sound like they could have come right out of a Thin Lizzy album. They might have the best solos of the year. Right from the first track, you can see how this band have perfected them. They help round out the songs and are easily the highlights of the album for me. The songwriting overall in this album is fantastic. While not particularly heavy, the melodies really help keep the songs memorable, and I also like the fact this band aren't just trying to go really fast or really heavy. It makes them have their own individual sound, and almost a proggy nature, especially because a lot of the songs have various parts that come together to make the songs as good as they are. They really are their own band, not sound like anyone else coming out today, which makes them really stand out to me. The bass and drums are also excellent, and as the year went on, it only grew in my rankings, and is one I can see myself going back to with years to come. Unto Others are one of my favourite modern bands, and if I'm being honest, I kinda expected them to rank a bit higher on this list, especially compared to their previous album. To get its flaws right out of the way quickly, the band obviously tried to experiment on this album a lot more than on previous ones, and while they basically all work, the album is somewhat bloated and could do with a bit of trimming in my opinion. However, that's not a big deal when basically all the songs are amazing. Songs like Mama Likes the Door Closed are fun rockers that will appease those who enjoyed their previous albums, while songs like Angel of the Night and Cold World shows how this band are able to slow down their music to really add on the atmosphere. The vocals from Gabriel Franco are very unique and can be a sticking point for some people, but really adds the whole goth feel of the album for me, sounding wonderfully haunting and beautiful, while being heartbroken at the same time. The melodies and hooks on this album are really what bring me back, however. They really stay stuck in your head for weeks on end. It's the band's biggest strength and why I think they'll be able to break through to a larger audience, which this album is already somewhat doing for them. It's not perfect by any means, and I do think that if you want to give this band a try, Strength is the best place to start, but this is a collection of songs that once again proves that Unto Others are one of the most formidable forces in modern metal. When I did my list halfway through the year, this album made its number 11, but after I released that video, I just kept returning to this album. Upon Stone debuted one of the best Melodeath albums I've heard in a long while. Melodeath is hard to do right, but when you do it right, like on this album, it can be some of the best metal out there for me. The vocals are so great, being nice and gritty, but you can understand what he's saying, at least most of the time. It's high praise, but he reminds me of Chuck Schuldiner. He's able to lift these songs up beyond anything they would be without him. He doesn't steal the spotlight, however, as the guitars on this album are awesome. They are able to weave great riffs for each song, as well as some of the best solos of the year. They remind me a lot of Children of Bodom in how they are able to shred so quickly, but still come up with hooks in the solos that make them very memorable, not just needless shred work. Also, the album clocks in at just over 30 minutes long, which works entirely in its favour. I'm able just to pop it on whenever I want, and that's made it one of the most listened to albums of the year for me. This is the album that In Flames have been refusing to make for going on 25 years, and I cannot wait to hear what they do next. This album is short and sweet, being one of the most memorable and fun albums of the entire year. Scorched Oak were one of the biggest surprises of the whole year for me. I had never even heard of them before this year, but from one look at the cover, I knew I just had to listen to this, and thank God I did, because it was such a joy to listen to as many times as I did. While I am not a massive fan of a lot of music that is under the umbrella of Doom, this year has shown me there is plenty of it I still enjoy, and this is one of them. Mixing Doom with Stoner with some progressive parts, this has a really unique sound to it. This is like if Nightwish were a Doom band, not really in the music, but how they use a male and female singer. The man sings a lot gruffer and macho, quite like Marco, while their female singer and bassist, Linda, has one of the most beautiful voices of the year. She has a German accent and isn't afraid to show it, and it gives her a lot of personality. The way they gel with each other is a really special thing about this band that helped them stand apart, and that's not the only good thing here. The production on here is immense, really helping the music paint pictures, and I love the guitar playing on here. Not only does it do both electric and acoustic stuff, but the riffs on here are big and doomy without being slow and boring, which I find a lot of Doom can unfortunately fit into. The bass is loud in the mix and helps the songs keep chugging at a great pace, as with the drums which don't just stick to basic rhythms but have some really cool fills and differences in it. There is also somewhat a Middle Eastern vibe to this album as well, which I'm not sure wasn't completely intended, but either way gives this album a lot of personality that it wouldn't have without it. This was, as usual with stuff this high on this list, an album that is just getting better and better as the year went on, and I hope great things for this band in the future. Scorched Oak showed me that Doom could be a lot better than I thought it was, then Castle Rat showed me that Doom albums could be a contender for Album of the Year. After seeing a bunch of my friends saying this was up there on their Album of the Year lists, I had to give it a try, and boy was I not disappointed. The album grabbed my attention right from the opener, Dagger Dragger, with the loud bass and great riffing showing you what you're going to be in store for. They sound a lot like Green Lung, which is an absolute positive, and bring the old Sabbath style of Doom back, which I always prefer as that's my favourite type of Doom. It has a good speed to it which keeps it from being boring, with the bass leading it to make it have a lot of drive and not come off as boring. It's not all quick and fast however, and the slow and emotional parts like Fresh Fur really hit the right spot. Riley Pinkerton, also known as the Rat Queen, has one of the best voices I've heard in a long while. She really adds to the feel of the music, having so much personality in her voice, and doing well on both the faster, heavier songs as well as the slower, more authentic songs. The best part about this album is the bass, however. It's loud in the mix and easily the best part. As a bassist myself, I love hearing people do interesting stuff with it. It doesn't just go along with the root notes, and it does its own thing a lot of the time, really adding to the thunderous feel the album has. Overall, listen to this album if you haven't already. It's one of the most impressive and unique albums of the entire year. Freeways have been a band I've been meaning to give a listen, and I'm glad this new album gave me a good reason to get into them, cause they're amazing. There's a real sense of nostalgia I get from this album, and that's not just cause it sounds like older rock and metal, even the production has a nice warmness to it, if that makes sense, and that added so much of my love for this album. It's very homely and almost comforting, and the first time I played it, I had a massive smile all over my face. The vocals are great and have a real good personality to them, and the harmonies are literally to die for. The songs are little moments that give them so much personality that you don't see a lot with new music. The album isn't just filled with the warmer, slower songs that give me a comforting feeling, but songs like Give 'Em the Gears have a faster pace that absolutely rip, while the riffing and bass work especially being the highlights of these types of songs. Whenever the band rock out, it's a ton of fun to listen to. While there's a lot of nostalgia and references to 80s metal these days, there hasn't been as much for the 70s, and that's why albums like this sound so fresh to me. We haven't had a lot of albums that sound like this these days. The only reason this isn't as high as it was halfway through the year is that I didn't return to it as much as I thought I would, but don't take that as a knock on this album. I personally think of this as a summer album, so maybe when that time comes around this year, I'll check it out more again, but that can only be said when it happens. Give this a listen if you're a fan of any 70s rock. Trust me, you won't regret it in the slightest. This was the album that, halfway through the year, was my #1 album of the year. And while it isn't quite up to there anymore, don't take it as a slight to this album, but more so that the two albums that were better, I just liked even more. Female vocals have made up a good portion of this list, with Sea of Consciousness having some of the best. Just like Scorched Oak, she has an accent that really adds much more personality to her vocals than some others, and while her more distorted and gritty vocals took a little bit for me to get used to, when she sings more mellow and beautifully, it's one of the best things I've heard all year. The best song on this album is Reflections. It shows both the more mellow and beautiful sound for this album, as well as when the chorus comes in and the vocals and music absolutely rip. It stands out so much from other releases that I can't really link it to any other band, because it sounds like nothing I've ever heard before. The guitars are awesome, and range from speedy ripping to acoustic harmonizing, and the production really adds to this amazing album. It also never feels as long as the runtime may make you feel. It finishes right when you think it should. Unlike a lot of albums that are over 45 minutes, this one doesn't feel like it wastes a second. This is easily the most unique album I heard in 2024. It tries so much new stuff, and while I've seen some people saying it may be a bit all over the place, I think that has so much personality and fun in it that I don't really care. Check this one out if you haven't. It's easily my favourite extreme metal album of the entire year. When I started to get into the movement known as the new wave of traditional heavy metal, one of the first bands I really got into was Traveller. I listened to both the debut and especially their second album, Termination Shock, so much around 2021-2022, and have been waiting for this new album for what feels like forever. And it does not disappoint. Halfway through the year, this album made its number 5, but this album was one that stayed in my rotation throughout the entire year. The ripping guitar leads continue to be as amazing as ever, the solos on all the songs are some of the best this year, and the production really helps give them more fire. And they're the highlights of songs like Dark Skull and Heavy Hearts. The leads aren't just there for the solos, but all the little licks they do throughout the album just have so much personality to them. So many hooks, so many parts that make you want to sing along, it's so much fun. The album never lets up and every song is interesting and unique for its own reasons. It's also infinitely re-listenable, and probably has the most unique identity out of any of the band's albums, and I'm a massive fan of the direction they were going in. I got to see the band live finally this year, and they did not disappoint, playing most of this album live and it was as good as you could have ever imagined. The band have announced sadly that they have split up, and while I really hope they come back, this is one hell of a way to close out one of the best discographies in metal. If you know me or follow me on anything, it will come as absolutely no surprise that Throw Down the Gauntlet by Amethyst is my number 1 album of 2024, and it's doing nothing but get better with every listen. Ever since it came out, I've basically listened to it every single week. I got into Amethyst with their debut EP, Rock Nights, last year, and a lot of people wondered whether they would be able to top it with this album, or if there would be a flash in the pan, and boy did they prove us they were going to be here for a while. The album is basically completely perfect. I have no notes or criticism about it. While yes, the sound is from the 80s, it still has a very unique sound to it, considering it tries to sound more like the Swedish metal bands of the 80s, a sound very few people do nowadays. The production only helps it, giving it an almost otherworldly feel, but the songwriting is where the band really come alive. Every song is a classic, nothing feels like filler or like it shouldn't be there. Right from the opening riff of Embers of the Loose to the closing moments of Under a Rising Moon, this is a pure joy to listen to. The guitars, the bass, they all play around each other like a band that have been together for decades, and it's crazy that this is being done on a band's debut album. But for me at least, the vocals are what absolutely send this band from being great to being one of my favourites of all time. They are so different from what a lot of bands try to do, not just trying to sing high or hit crazy notes, but really trying to sound as unique as possible while fitting every single song. I can basically sing this album from beginning to end, crazy for an album that's only been out for about 3 months, but it's a testament to how good and catchy the songwriting is on here. Some of my favourite songs, not just of the year, but of all time are on this album, and it was so good to see so many people talking about it. If you've not given this a listen, you are missing out, as this is not only one of my favourite albums of 2024, but already one of my favourite albums of all time. And with that, we're now on to 2025, and it's looking to be just as good, if not better than last year. If you've enjoyed this video or any other videos on my channel, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps me in the algorithm. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or Blue Sky, and follow my Album of the Year page for my latest reviews. All the links will be in the description below. But with that, stay safe, stay happy, and stay metal!